Thank you for joining the Lakeside Light Podcast. It's light to help you see your way, and a light version of our full televised Sunday services, which you can find on our website at lakesidechurch.org. This audio podcast is a weekly sermon message of intellectual, spiritual, and sometimes humorous nourishment for the road. Enjoy.
I'm just a little bit taller than Pastor Louisa, so I had to move that a little bit, but thank you. All right. This summer, I had the fortune of attending the Youth Montreat Conference with a whole group of really talented and awesome kids. The theme for the week was planting peace, and in our small groups and our worship opportunities, we explored ways that we could not only find peace in and among ourselves, but also find ways to cultivate it in our lives. I love this theme because, as we all know, we could use some peace in our lives, and that there's a lot of different things that get in the way of that peace. If there wasn't, you wouldn't all be here on a Sunday morning. And my wife and Diana and I learned this when we moved to our first real adult house. That was a great part of our lives. My wife, Diana, who's a pastor, she serves just down the street at Florence Christian Church. She had been called to her first church in Pennsylvania. That's where we were before we moved to the area. And when we were moving there, we found this cute little duplex. And greatest thing about it was just a block from the church where she would be working. So we were great and excited about becoming adults and going to this house and being there, and the rent wasn't bad, and it was a cool neighborhood with lots of little restaurants and shops. And after this week of house hunting, we were excited just to have this moment of peace, to have dinner in this house with our dog Sophie, and just begin our new lives there. And on that first evening where we were having dinner in our new place, we heard the goose. Now, what's the goose? Now, the goose was what we began to call this honking siren. That's probably the best way to describe this noise that would randomly blare in our neighborhood. Now, I'm not going to try to make the noise. You know what a goose sounds like. Just think of a goose on steroids and 100 times louder. That's what it was. And we learned later that we were just a few blocks from the historic firehouse in this town. And that was the sound of emergency personnel being called to action, which was great because you could not miss the goose anywhere in town. But while people in the town loved this quirky little part of small town life, it was not a part of peace that I originally found in my life. So when Jesus tells us in today's scripture passage that he is going to give us peace, that we will find peace in this world, I'm a little skeptical because I remember that horn. I remember the goose blaring at all hours of the day and getting in the way of my peace. So a few weeks before going to Montreat this summer, they send all of the leaders out a packet, all full of different things that we'll be talking about during this week. And I noticed that we'd be talking about today's gospel passage, the passage from the Gospel of John. And let me tell you a secret. It's a passage that's always bothered me. Now, as Pastor Louisa said, today's passage takes place during what scholars call the farewell discourse. And that's a part of the Gospel of John, chapters 14 through 17, which contains the final words of wisdom that Jesus wants to impart to his disciples before he dies and goes back up to heaven. And the reason that this passage has always bothered me, that it's always kind of upset me, is that right when Jesus makes it clear to his disciples that he's about to die, that they will abandon him and they will abandon each other, and that they'll be persecuted and tortured, Jesus tells his disciples about all these many terrible things that are in store for them, and then he has the audacity to say to them, "Don't worry, have peace. I've conquered the world." It's almost absurd. It actually makes me a little bit upset that he would say peace is even an option in the face of all that he is talking about? How could Jesus, who knows all that is going on at his time in the world and knows about what's going on now in the future, how could he look his disciples in the eyes, look the people who will be reading these words in the eyes, and promise them peace? How could someone tell you to have peace knowing the effects of our treatment on God's creation? How could someone tell you to have peace in the face of war and armed conflict in this world? How could someone tell you to have peace in the face of fractured communities during yet another contentious and rancorous election cycle? In doing research for the sermon, I saw the challenges that face Gen Alpha. That's the cohort that I got to spend a week with at Montreat. From mental health issues to the fear of gun violence to the proliferation of AI, it doesn't always seem like peace even has a chance in this world. And Jesus knows this. Still, in this passage, he tells the disciples, he tells us that peace is possible. But the question still stands. In spite of all we see, should we still listen to him? Is he just unconnected to the way things are and the way things work in this world? Well, before we answer that question, let's start at the beginning. What even is this peace that Jesus is talking about? What is this peace that he has said that the disciples already have? Well, I think there's more than one type of peace, and the simplest type of peace is the absence of conflict. For example, the United States is at peace with Canada because we're not actively in conflict with the country of Canada. We have no current plans to invade them for their poutine or their superior chocolate candy or anything like that. I grew up on the border, so I love Canadian food. It's great. An absence of conflict is also a choice in how we treat those around us. We resolve to live at peace with our neighbor down the street who has a sign for a city council candidate that we really don't like. It's when we choose to live well with others who think and worship and do things differently than we do. This type of peace doesn't mean that we never get angry with others or that we never get frustrated with them, but it does mean that we seek to see the image of God in everyone and to live life well with them. So that's one kind of peace. So, okay, peace is when we don't invade Canada and we don't get in an argument with our neighbor. That's pretty simple stuff to do, right? But peace is also something that takes place inside each of us. We can't always control the things that threaten peace outside of us. I couldn't control the goose, and we can't control whether we are at war with Canada. But I can do things inside of myself to cultivate peace. And I'm sure all of you do in your lives as well. Just a couple weeks ago, my wife and I were on a beautiful beach in Florida, watching dolphins and enjoying the wonderful weather there. And that was one of the ways in which we find peace together. I find peace on early morning bike rides where I go over the bridge, now that it's finally completed, in Cincinnati, and I'm able to find peace in those moments of quiet. I found peace in seeking out people to talk to and lean to when I couldn't find peace on my own. Peace means caring for our minds, our bodies, our souls, and finding help when we need to do that. And that's time and energy well spent. If we have peace inside of ourselves, it's much easier to plant peace in the world. And I've been thinking about this metaphor of peace, this idea of peace as something that you plant a lot since we've gone to Montreat a few months ago. Because while we were there, we took part in activities that not only reminded just the youth, but also me, that peace can grow in some unexpected places if you let it. Now, I'm from Detroit, so if you want to come talk to me about classic cars or hockey or weird Canadian foods, I've got those things down pretty well. But one of those things I'm not great at is gardening. we didn't have a garden at my house growing up. And so when I moved to Bellevue, my wife and I moved to Bellevue a few years ago, we had this big backyard, and I was like, well, I got to grow something, right? And I've slowly gotten to be okay at it, I guess, is the best way to put it. Not great, but okay. And I've never been a really good gardener. So I was excited when our first activity at Montreat was planting flowers, and I just knew there was no way I was going to be able to do this. And we didn't do it in a normal way you would plant flowers. We didn't go out to a field and plant them in some nice soil. Instead, what we did was we took a whole bunch of paper, kind of ripped it up, and then put it into a blender. Then we poured some water on top of it, let it blend, do its blending thing for a little while, and made like this weird mushy ball and planted some wildflower seeds into it. And then our leaders, our nice college student leaders, gave us these cups of mush and wildflower seeds to each of us, and they were like, trust me, something's going to grow in here. If you give it some time, maybe put it by a window or something, something will grow. And I'm like, I've been here at Montreat for just a couple hours, and I'm like, yeah, right, this isn't going to happen. There is no way that from mush and paper and water that anything will grow. So I took this plant, this little cup, and I put it in a corner of my room back where we were staying in the hall, and kind of forgot about it for a couple of days. Just let it kind of sit there. And I figured, hey, at the end of the week, nothing will grow. I'll be able to tell them, this didn't really work. And I'll pitch it on my way out towards the bus at the end of the week. But about 4 or 5 days later, I had already forgotten about this cup. I was walking past it one morning, and I looked down, and I saw just a little sprout coming up out of that cup. This cup of paper mush that had been sitting in a corner. I didn't even put it in sunlight. I was so unexcited about this whole thing. I was just sitting in this corner, had begun to sprout. And it got me thinking about this whole theme of peace and the way that we can help plant peace in this world. Because in a world where peace sometimes seems so far away, seems so impossible, if that little wildflower could grow in that cup in the corner of my room, maybe there is a chance for peace in this world. Look, I still think that peace can often seem far away. That peace sometimes seems impossible. And when I read this passage, I still kind of want to get a little bit angry with Jesus when he says that peace is possible in these situations where it just does not seem possible. But then I remember that wildflower. I remember the service projects our youth have done that have helped others find comfort in God. I remember the ways in which the church, against all odds, have planted peace in this world. The way people have sacrificed their energy, their resources, and even their safety to ensure others have the chance to flourish. And I look at it and I say, maybe it is a bit more possible than I want to give it credit. And so when I want to look at the world the way I look at that flower, the way that I say that there's just no possible way for there to be goodness, peace, faithfulness, any of that good stuff. But Christ's words in these scriptures always pull me back. They challenge me to embrace the audacity and impossibility of peace and believe that it is something that we, all of us, have the ability to plant. Each of us can go into this world. We can sow. We can plant peace. And the wonderful thing is that we know that God will help bring it to bloom. Amen.
The Lakeside Light Podcast is a copyrighted production of Lakeside Presbyterian Church. Visit our website at lakesidechurch.org for more information. Have a great week.